The kind of town where everybody knows your business before you do. That's where I grew up, and that's where I ended up staying. Not because I had to, because I chose to. There's a difference, and most people never figure that out. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 63 years old, I've got two bad knees from 30 years of working concrete, and I've learned that the quieter you are, the more people decide who you are on your behalf. My younger brother Curtis decided who I was a long time ago. He's 57 now. 6 years younger, sharper dresser, the kind of man who shakes your hand and makes eye contact just a half second too long, like he's already calculating what you're worth to him. He sells commercial real estate out of an office downtown with his name on a glass door. Curtis Albright, commercial property specialist. He had business cards made up before he even had clients. That's the kind of man he is. We grew up in the same house on Delaney Road in Millhaven, Ohio. Same parents, same tired linoleum kitchen floor, same father who worked the overnight shift at the plant and slept through most of our childhoods. But somewhere along the way, Curtis and I ended up in two completely different versions of our own lives. And he never missed an opportunity to remind me which version was better. I wasn't the golden son. That was Curtis. I was the one who stayed local, went into construction, drove a truck that had more rust than paint for the better part of a decade. I wasn't flashy. I didn't need to be. What Curtis didn't know, what I never felt the need to tell him, was that I had built something real and quiet and mine. And I kept it that way on purpose. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This particular story starts on the 4th of July. Every year, my Aunt Norma hosts a cookout at her place out on Route 9. She's 78, drives herself to church every Sunday, and still makes potato salad from scratch the way our grandmother taught her. The gathering has been going on since before I was born. It's the kind of family tradition that outlasts marriages and grudges and bad years. It just keeps happening, like weather. I drove out there alone, the way I usually did for these things. Parked my truck on the grass alongside the gravel drive, grabbed the case of Shiner Bock I brought, and walked through the gate into Norma's backyard. It was the middle of the afternoon, maybe 90 degrees. Cicadas so loud you had to raise your voice. My cousin Brenda was working the grill. Her husband was trying to keep 3 kids from running into the creek. Norma was sitting under the big oak in a lawn chair, fanning herself with a paper plate and talking to whoever sat down next to her. I found a spot in the shade and stayed mostly to myself, the way I always do at these things. I'm not unfriendly. I just don't feel the need to perform for people. I listened. I watched. I drank 1 beer slowly. That's always been enough for me. Curtis showed up about an hour in. He drove a leased BMW. Silver, new, spotless in a way that felt almost aggressive given it was a gravel and grass situation. He came through the gate with his wife Pamela on his arm and immediately worked the crowd like he was running for something. Hugged Norma. Slapped backs. Laughed too loud at his own story. I watched from my chair in the shade and felt nothing in particular. That was normal. That was just Curtis. He eventually made his way over to where I was sitting. "Ray," he said, pointing at me like I was a punchline he'd just remembered. I said, "Hey." He dropped into the chair beside me, loosened his collar like he was doing me a favor by relaxing, and looked out at the yard. "You drive that same truck out here?" I did. He shook his head, smiling at nothing. "Man, that thing's gotta be, what, 12 years old?" 14, I said. 14. He repeated the number like it was a diagnosis. "You ever think about trading it in? Getting something that doesn't look like it survived a flood?" "Truck runs fine," I said. He made a sound in his throat. Not quite a laugh. The kind of sound that means whatever you say. We sat for a minute without talking. Brenda called someone's name across the yard. A kid shrieked near the creek. Curtis swirled the ice in his cup. Then he said, "You still doing the concrete work?" "Still doing it." "Huh." Another pause. "I keep thinking you're going to do something with yourself one of these days." He said it lightly, like it was a joke I was in on. "I mean, 63, Ray. You think about that? 63 and still pouring concrete for other people's driveways." I looked at him. He was still looking out at the yard, smiling slightly, comfortable. "Must be something," he said, "getting to the back half of your 60s with nothing much to show for it, all those years." He shook his head again, slow and theatrical. I feel for you, man. I genuinely do. No offense." He held up his hand like he was warding off a response that wasn't coming. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I said, "You want another beer?" He looked at me then, actually looked at me, like he wasn't sure what to make of that. "Sure," he said finally. I got up, got him a beer, came back, and sat down. We talked about other things, sports, the heat, Aunt Norma's potato salad. I let it go. But I remembered every word. The thing about Curtis is that he'd been saying things like that my whole life, in one form or another. When we were kids, it was about my grades, my clothes, my friends. When we were young men, it was about my job, my apartment, my truck. It was always delivered the same way, lightly, with a smile, like a man who's just genuinely concerned. No offense. Like those two words make anything that came before them disappear. I stopped explaining myself to Curtis a long time ago. Not because I gave up or got tired. Because I realized that some people have already decided the story, and no amount of evidence changes it. You can argue with a closed verdict, or you can just go home and live your actual life. I chose to live my actual life. That life, the one Curtis knew nothing about, looked like this. 22 years ago, I met a woman named Gail at a continuing education class I was taking at the community college, a business accounting course, because I'd started picking up small commercial contracts and wanted to understand the numbers better. Gail was there because she was finishing her associate's degree while working full-time at a medical supply company. She was smart and serious and laughed easily when something actually struck her as funny, which was different from how a lot of people laugh. We had coffee after the third class. We talked for 3 hours. I drove home thinking I was in trouble, in the best possible way. We were married 2 years later, small ceremony, justice of the peace, 2 witnesses, dinner at a place we liked. Neither of us needed a production. We have 2 daughters. Mara is 19 now, finishing her first year at Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship. Lily, our Lily, not that I've ever had to explain her to anyone who mattered, is 16 and has her learner's permit and a very strong opinion about everything. Gail and I bought a piece of property about 12 miles outside of Millhaven when Mara was 3. 4 acres, a farmhouse that needed work, a barn. I spent 5 years rebuilding that house in my off hours. Reframed the addition myself. Rewired with a licensed electrician friend. Built the deck from scratch. Gail did the interiors and managed every detail with the precision of someone who has never once been careless about something she cared about. The concrete work, the thing Curtis said with such gentle contempt, built that property. Paid for it free and clear by the time Mara was 10. The concrete work also funded a small equipment rental business I started with a partner named Hector about 15 years ago. We started with 2 excavators and a skid steer. We now have a fleet, a shop, a full-time mechanic, and 3 operators on payroll. I'm the silent partner. Hector runs the day-to-day, but my name is on half the LLC. I never told Curtis any of this. Not because I was hiding from him, exactly. It was more that I had stopped feeling like he was entitled to it. When someone has spent 30 years treating your life like a cautionary tale, you stop issuing updates. You just stop. And it turns out the world doesn't actually end when you do. Gail knew about Curtis. She asked once, early in our marriage, why I didn't invite him to things, why I didn't talk about him the way people talk about siblings they're close to. I explained, as best I could, that Curtis and I had a specific dynamic that had never changed and probably never would, and that I had made peace with that by keeping some distance. She didn't push. She respected it. My daughters know they have an uncle in town. They know his name. That's about the extent of it, and that's by design. I'm not interested in having my kids perform family for people who've spent decades treating their father like a punchline. Aunt Norma's knows Gail. Norma has been to our house. Norma has held both my daughters when they were babies. Norma keeps things to herself because Norma understands, in the way of people who have seen enough family drama to fill several books, that sometimes keeping a confidence is an act of love. Curtis, somehow, across 22 years of these family events, had never figured out that I had a whole other life. He'd built his entire picture of me from a distance and never questioned whether the picture was accurate. He was about to. It was a Tuesday in October when he called me. Not a holiday, not a special occasion, a regular Tuesday at 6:15 in the evening when I was sitting at my kitchen table helping Lily work through a chemistry problem, and Gail was in the next room on a call with her sister. I didn't recognize the number at first. Curtis and I didn't call each other. "Ray," he said when I picked up. His voice was different. The usual smooth surface was gone. "Curtis, hey. So, I need to talk to you about something." A pause. "I'm in a situation." I waited. He cleared his throat. "The deal I've been working. The Hargrove Commons development. You probably haven't heard of it. It's a big commercial thing downtown. I've had my commission tied up in this for 14 months. The whole thing it fell apart. Financing collapsed. Developer walked. I'm holding the bag on a lot of expenses, I fronted. Another pause. A lot of expenses. How much? I said. 62,000, give or take. I was quiet for a moment. I need a bridge loan, he said. Just something to get me to the next deal. I've got 3 listings that are going to close in the spring. I just need to get through the next few months. I thought about that 4th of July afternoon. His voice light and comfortable. No offense. How's Pamela doing? I said. It's been hard. We've been under a lot of stress. I imagine. Another pause. He was waiting for me to say something more concrete. I let him wait. I wouldn't ask if I had anywhere else to go, he said. The banks aren't going to move fast enough. My credit line's maxed. Your family, Ray. Family. He said that word like it was a card he hadn't played yet and thought might still work. I'm gonna need to think about it, I said. Of course. Yeah, of course. Take your time. The relief in his voice was immediate and a little painful. He was grateful I hadn't said no outright. I'll call you this week, I said. We hung up. I sat there for a minute. Lily looked up from her chemistry textbook. You okay, Dad? I'm fine, Bug. Let's finish this problem. Gail and I talked about it that night after the girls were in their rooms. We sat at the kitchen table with decaf, and I laid out the whole thing, including the 4th of July comments, including the entire history of Curtis and what he'd been like since we were children. Gail had never met him in person, only knew him through what I'd described over the years. She listened without interrupting. She does that. When I finished, she held her mug and thought for a moment. What do you want to do? She said. I want to help him, I said. He's my brother. But I don't want to write him a check and let him walk away thinking the check is all that happened here. She nodded slowly. So you want to help him in a way where he actually sees you. That was exactly it. That was Gail in one sentence. Yes, I said. She set her mug down. Then help him in a way where he has to look at you clearly to receive the help. I called Curtis the following Thursday. I've been thinking about your situation, I said. Yeah. His voice was careful. I'm not going to give you $62,000. A beat of silence. Ray, let me finish, I said. I'm going to help you, but it's not going to be a check that makes your problem disappear. I'll front you $20,000. That's enough to cover your most urgent expenses and keep you operating. The rest is your problem to work through. A payment plan with whoever you owe, a conversation with your bank, whatever it takes. $20,000, and it's a loan, not a gift. I'll write up a simple promissory note, nothing complicated, and you'll pay it back when the spring listings close. Silence. There's one other thing, I said. What? I want to have the dinner with you. You, me, and my family. Another silence, longer this time. Your family, my wife and daughters. I'd like you to meet them. You? You're married? 20 years, I said. 2 daughters, 19 and 16. My wife's name is Gail. She's a medical products director at a regional distribution company. My older daughter is a sophomore at Ohio State. My younger one drives me crazy in the best possible way. Nothing on the other end of the line for a long moment. Ray. His voice had changed. I couldn't quite describe how. I had no idea. I know you didn't, I said. That was a choice I made. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't something you missed. I stopped feeling like I needed to share my life with someone who had already made up his mind about it. Another long silence. Something shifted in it. You could almost hear it. The 4th of July thing, he said quietly. When I said, about nothing to show for yourself. Yeah, I was being an ass. Yeah, you were, I said. You've been that way for a long time. I'm not saying this to make you feel terrible, Curtis. I'm saying it because I think it's time you actually knew me, and I think I'm willing to try that if you are. He was quiet for a long time after that. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I'd like to meet your family, he said. Good, I said. I'll have Gail pick a restaurant she likes. We had dinner on a Saturday in November, 3 weeks later. A place in the next town over that Gail has always loved. Not fancy, not a chain. The kind of independent restaurant with good lighting and a real wine list and enough space between the tables to actually talk. I got there first, the way I always do anywhere. Sat at the table Gail had reserved, looked at the menu, waited. Gail and the girls arrived next. Mara was home for the weekend from Columbus. Lily had put on an actual nice sweater without being asked, which I noted silently and appreciated. Gail looked calm and warm and entirely herself. She always does. Curtis and Pamela came in about 5 minutes after us. I saw him spot our table from across the room. I watched his face do something complicated. He'd known me my entire life. He'd built an entire story about who I was. The older brother who never quite made it, who drove an old truck and poured concrete and showed up at family events alone and left early. The quiet one. The one you felt sorry for. And then he walked across that restaurant and saw my wife, who carries herself like someone completely comfortable with exactly who she is. He saw my daughter Mara, who shook his hand and made direct eye contact. He saw Lily, who said, "Nice to meet you, Uncle Curtis," and then immediately asked Pamela if she liked Thai food because there was a place down the street that was really good. I watched him recalibrate in real time. It wasn't humiliating. I want to be clear about that. I had not arranged this to humiliate him. Humiliation is a short feeling that doesn't change anything. What I wanted was for him to simply see clearly, maybe for the first time in a long time, that the story he'd told about me wasn't the true one. We had a good dinner. Not perfect. There were moments of awkward recalibration, moments where Curtis started to say something and stopped himself, like he was unlearning a habit mid-sentence. But there was also laughter. Lily made everyone at the table laugh twice, the way she does. Pamela turned out to be quieter than I'd expected, warmer. She'd been living in Curtis's world for a long time, and I think she was relieved to be somewhere that wasn't competitive. At the end of the night, while Gail was signing the receipt and the girls were putting their coats on, Curtis caught me in a moment alone near the door. He put his hand on my shoulder. "I didn't know," he said. "I want you to know that I understand that's on me, not on you." I looked at him. "I spent a lot of years deciding who you were," he said. "That wasn't fair." "No," I said. "It wasn't. I'd like to do this again, if that's okay with you." I thought about that. I thought about 30 years of small cuts and the word "no offense" used as a shield. I thought about my daughters, who deserved cousins and family they actually knew. I thought about Aunt Norma, who had always understood, and how she'd said to me once, years ago, that family is the thing you keep choosing even when it costs you something. "We'll see," I said. "You make good on that promissory note, and we'll see." He laughed. Not the performance laugh from the cookout, but a real one. Surprised out of him. "Fair enough," he said. The promissory note was signed and notarized the following week. Curtis paid it back in 2 installments, first in April when one listing closed, the rest in June. He didn't drag it out or make excuses. He paid it. We've had dinner twice more since then. Mara warmed up to him faster than I expected. Lily mostly ignores him but asks Pamela questions, which I think is its own kind of acceptance. Curtis doesn't make comments about my truck anymore. He stopped somewhere around the 3rd dinner. Without anyone saying anything, he just stopped. Maybe he drove past a piece of commercial property that had been built on a concrete foundation poured by men like me, or maybe he just grew up a little. I don't need to know the reason. What I know is this: 63 years old, and I have a house I built with my own hands, a business that runs without me having to be loud about it, a wife who understood me before she fully knew me and has known me fully ever since, and 2 daughters who are, without question, without contest, the best thing I have ever been part of. I didn't need Curtis to know any of that for it to be true. But I'll admit, on that November night when I watched him walk across the restaurant, and his face did that complicated thing, something settled in me that I hadn't known was still unsettled. Not pride, not victory, just the quiet, plain fact of being seen. That's the thing they don't tell you about living privately, about keeping your life to yourself for years and years. You get very good at not needing anyone's approval. You genuinely stop caring what certain people think. And then one day, unexpectedly, in a restaurant with good lighting and your family at the table, someone looks at you and finally understands that they had you wrong. And it turns out that even when you've stopped needing it, being known still means something. I drove home that night with Gail asleep in the passenger seat and Lily and Mara in the back, talking quietly about something I couldn't quite hear, and the truck doing what it always does. Running steady, getting us where we're going, and I thought, this is it. This right here is what I built. Not to show anyone, not to prove anything, just because it was mine to build, and I built it.